Hey, welcome back to Level 6 Math. This is Mr. C with our Saxon Math Lesson 13. Today we're going to talk about comparing problems with comparing and elapsed time problems. Now, elapsed time problems is something new that we're seeing this year. Problems about comparing, we really started this in Lesson 11 with story problems, and then we did greater than and less than in our last lesson, and so we're really putting those two things together. So it's just the next step with this one. But then elapsed time problems is a new concept. These are both things that we use a lot in the real world, and so this is an important lesson, but students haven't found it to be too challenging of a lesson, at least on the surface. Some people really struggle with dates and times and subtracting those, so we'll get into the nitty-gritty there. We've practiced solving word problems in 11. We've used addition patterns to do that. Some word problems about comparing the size of two groups, they usually ask like, how many more were there of this group in the first group, or how many fewer in the second group? And in this lesson, we're going to be really particular about how you phrase certain things. Because we're looking at a difference, remember that subtraction, or we're looking at a sum, and so we need to be really careful with how we word our things. So here with a subtraction pattern, we start with something greater, we take something lesser, and we're looking for the difference. So for example, there were 324 girls and 289 boys in the school. If we wanted to find what's the total number of students in the school, we could use an addition pattern and look to find a sum. But we're asking now, how many fewer boys than girls were there in the school? So we're looking, what's the greater of those? We're looking fewer boys, so we're going to subtract the boys from the girls, all right? So we take our four-step process. First, we're comparing the number of boys, how many fewer, so we know this is a subtraction problem. In step 2, we use the pattern to write an equation, the greater and the lesser. The greater is the girls, 324, minus the lesser, the boys, 289, and then we're going to solve for the difference. So that's the important thing here, is we're looking for a difference. All right, so we just set this up now as an equation. 324 girls minus 289 boys. And our answer is, of course, 35. But the way we'd say that is 35, not 35 boys, but 35 fewer boys, because there's fewer boys than girls. So that's really where we're getting particular with the language here. How can we check our answer? We simply add 35 to the number of boys and see if it's equal then to the number of girls, which it would be. Now here's a new thing, elapsed time. It's the length of time between two events. Today we're going to look in particular at years, and years isn't too difficult except because months come at different times of the year. Sometimes we're going to be off by a year, and I'll get to that in a minute. Where this is going to become much more difficult is when we get into time, and we'll talk about that later. All right, so we'll illustrate this on this ray. So there was a fixed set of time, and it's going indefinitely into the future. With an elapsed time, we look at an earlier date and a later date, and we're simply going to do a subtraction problem. So you can do this with your own birthday. Today's date and your birthday, let's just do that by year. So if I take today, it's 2020, and I take the year I was born, 1978, we can simply subtract that. So we're going to borrow here and change that to a 1. 10 subtract 2 is 2. 11 subtract 7 is 4. That will turn that to a 9, and that will make that 0, and we'll make that a 1, and that will be 0. So 42 years. Now here's where I said it can get off a little bit. I am not 42 years old, I'm 41. That's because my birthday in the year 2020 has not come yet. So if I had already if I'd already had my birthday this year, just like I had my birthday in that year, then it'd be the same. My birthday is actually in a couple weeks, and so in a couple weeks I will turn 42. So it's not exact because we're not doing months. We could do this with months. We're going to do that in a later lesson. Let's just stick to years for now. All right, so these are comparison problems. They have a subtraction pattern. You take the later date, you subtract the earlier date, and you solve for the difference. All right, so let's try this problem. How many years were there from the year Columbus landed in America in 1492 until the Pilgrims landed in 1620? So first we'll take the later date, Then we'll subtract the earlier date and look for the difference. Later, subtract earlier, look for difference. So the later date here was 1620. We'll subtract 1492. When we do that, we get 128 years, and that's the difference. Now we can check our work simply by adding 128 to the later, or to the later date, and that will give us our 1620. So it checks out. These really aren't that tricky. It's just getting used to setting up the problem in the right way, and that's why we're doing it in 4 steps instead of just doing it. Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809, and he died in 1865. So the earlier date is 1809, the later date is 1865. So we want to subtract 1809 from 1865. How many years did he live? And again, if the year he was born, or the year he died, if he hadn't reached his birthday yet, then we'd be off by a year. So we take the later date, subtract the earlier date, which would be 1865, subtract 1809, and we get 56 years old. We can check that by adding 56 to 1809 and getting 1865. Now if you do this every time and add it to the later date or the earlier date, you're always going to be able to check your work. You're always going to know if you got it right. So this is a really good lesson to check your work. All right. So when we review, we write the answer. Abraham Lincoln lived 56 years. Sometimes you're going to have to write a complete sentence to answer these problems. So make sure that you look at the prompt or look at the question to ask to see what they're asking for, because sometimes 56 years is not going to be enough. We would want to say Abraham Lincoln lived 56 years. So we know what that 56 years means. That's it. This is a pretty easy lesson. Good luck.